The Dornier Do-18 wasn't supposed to be a warplane. Born from peaceful ambitions to carry mail across vast oceans, this German flying boat found itself thrust into a conflict it was never designed for. On a September morning in 1939, one of these gentle giants would earn an unwanted distinction, becoming the first German aircraft shot down by British forces in World War II. In 1934, the Dornier Flugzeugwerk started development of a new twin-engine flying boat to replace the Dornier Do-J. Wow! Whale in both military and civil roles. The company, led by Claude Dornier, had built its reputation on creating reliable flying boats that could conquer vast distances. The new aircraft would be called the Do-18, and it represented everything that was ambitious about German aviation in the 1930s. The resultant design, Do-18, retained the layout of the WAL, with a metal hull fitted with distinctive stabilizing sponsons, and powered by two engines above the wing in a push-pull layout, but was aerodynamically and hydrodynamically more efficient. Picture a sleek metal bird designed to dance between air and water, with engines mounted high above the wings, one pulling from the front, one pushing from behind. It was an elegant solution to an engineering challenge. The first prototype, the Do-18, a registration DHS, and named Monson by Deutsche Lufthansa, flew on 15 March 1935, powered by two of the earlier 410 kW, 550 HP Junkers Jumo 5C diesels, as the planned Jumo 205s were not yet available. The maiden flight was promising, but tragedy struck early. It was lost on 2 November 1935 over the Baltic Sea during high-speed tests. Despite this setback, Dornier pressed on. The Do-18 was too important to abandon. Deutsche Lufthansa received 5 aircraft and used these for tests between the Azores and the North American continent in 1936, and on their mail route over the South Atlantic from 1937 to 1939. These weren't military missions. They were civilian operations, connecting continents through the air when such flights were still considered adventures. The aircraft's capabilities were remarkable for their time. On 27-29 March 1938, a Do-18W established a seaplane record, flying non-stop a straight distance of 8391 km, 5,214 mi from start point, Devon to Caravelas in Brazil. Think about that, over 5,000 miles without stopping, in an era when most aircraft struggled to fly a few hundred miles reliably. On 10-11 September, when Zephyr, flown by Flugkapitän Blankenberg with Deutsche Lufthansa director Freiherr von Gabelentz as passenger, was launched by catapult from the seaplane tender Schwabenland at Horta, Azores, flying the 4460 km 2,270 mi to New York City in 22 hours 12 minutes. Also on 11 September, Airlus flew from Horta to Hamilton, Bermuda in 18 hours 15 minutes, continuing to New York the next day. These were heady days for German aviation. The Do-18 represented the pinnacle of flying boat technology, a symbol of Germany's peaceful intentions and technological prowess. But even as these civilian aircraft were setting records and delivering mail, darker clouds were gathering. By 1939, the world had changed. The Do-18s that had once carried mail and passengers were pressed into military service. In Luftwaffe service, it was obsolete by the outbreak of the Second World War. But as the only military flying boat, 62, 58 serviceable Do-18s equipped a Staffel in each of 5 Kuerstenfliegergruppen coastal aviation groups, mainly on North Sea reconnaissance missions. The transformation from mail plane to military aircraft was neither smooth nor particularly successful. The Do-18 was slow, lightly armed, and vulnerable. Its crews knew they were flying an aircraft designed for peaceful skies, not combat. The defensive armament was minimal, usually just a few machine guns that offered more psychological comfort than actual protection. On the other side of the North Sea, Britain was scrambling to prepare for war. The Royal Navy's fleet, Air Arm, was operating from a new aircraft carrier, HMS Ark Royal, which had entered service just months before. On 25 September 1939, Ark Royal helped rescue the submarine Spearfish, which had been damaged by German warships off Horn Reefs in the Kattegat. While returning to port with Spearfish and the battleships Nelson and Rodney on 26 September, the ships were located by three Luftwaffe Dornier Do-18 seaplanes. The stage was set for a historic encounter. Three German Do-18s were conducting a reconnaissance patrol over the North Sea when they spotted the British fleet. For the crews of these flying boats, it should have been a routine mission: spot the enemy ships, report their position, and return to base. They had no way of knowing they were about to fly into history. Aboard HMS Ark Royal, the ship's radar operators detected the approaching German aircraft. The carrier's air group included 803 Naval Air Squadron. Flying the Blackburn Skua, an aircraft that served as both a dive bomber and a fighter. Operating out of Scapa Flow, the squadron carried out anti-submarine patrols in the northwestern approaches, losing two skuas in an attack on U-30 on 14 September 1939, and regular patrols off Norway, during which the squadron shot down the first German aircraft by a British aircraft in the war, a Dornier Do-18, on 26 September 1939. The skuas were scrambled to intercept. A Do-18 was the first German aircraft to be shot down by British aircraft during the war, when one of a formation of three was caught over the North Sea by 9 Fleet Air Arm Blackburn Skua fighter bombers of 803 Naval Air Squadron, flying from HMS Ark Royal on 26 September 1939. 9 British aircraft against 3 German flying boats, the odds were overwhelming. But this wasn't about a fair fight. This was war, just days old, and both sides were still learning its harsh rules. This Dornier, coded M7+YK, was shot down by LT-BS McEwen and Poe B.M. Seymour. The 4 crewmen of the stricken aircraft were picked up by the destroyer HMS Somali. Lieutenant B.S. McEwen, flying one of the skuas, will be credited with this first victory. For him and his gunner, Petty Officer B.M. Seymour, it was a moment of triumph mixed with the sobering reality of war. The Do-18 didn't stand a chance. As the skuas dove on their target, the German crew must have known their fate was sealed. The flying boat's defensive guns barked defiance, but against 9 attackers, it was hopeless. Bullets tore through the thin aluminum skin, engines sputtered and died, and the graceful flying boat that had once set records became a falling wreck. However, one says that one of the crew members, LT Wilhelm FHR von Rie-Eisenstein, was killed in the incident. It lists the surviving 3 crew members as LT Ernst Kerner, Ufs Hecht, and Ufs Schmalfeld. Other online records list all 4 members of the crew as taken prisoner, but indicate that LT Wilhelm FHR von Rie-Eisenstein may have died of wounds later or died in captivity. The human cost of this historic moment is often forgotten. These weren't just statistics or milestones. They were young men, far from home, caught in the machinery of war. The surviving German crew members were pulled from the cold North Sea by HMS Somali, beginning years of captivity. For Lieutenant Wilhelm FHR von Rie-Eisenstein, whether he died in the attack or later from his wounds, this first aerial victory of the war meant the ultimate sacrifice. Ark Royal launched 3 Blackburn skuas to disperse them. 1 Dornier was shot down in an event propagandized as first British aerial kill of the war. Later, it was learned that the pilot of a ferry battle achieved the first kill. The air commander aboard Ark Royal, aware that the surviving Dorniers would report the location of the British ships, ordered the aircraft to be secured and the anti-aircraft weapons readied. The British wasted no time in publicizing their victory, in a war that would be fought as much with propaganda as with bullets being first mattered. The newspapers trumpeted the success, boosting morale at home where people were still adjusting to the reality of another war with Germany, just 21 years after the last one ended. But the celebration aboard Ark Royal was short-lived. 4 Junkers Ju-88 bombers of the Luftwaffe bomber wing KG-30 soon appeared. 3 were driven away by anti-aircraft fire, but the 4th launched a 2,200-pound, 1,000 kg bomb at the carrier. The surviving Do-18s had done their job, They had reported the British fleet's position. Now the real bombers were coming. This was the harsh reality of the Do-18's war. As a reconnaissance aircraft, its job wasn't to fight, but to find the enemy and report back. Even in death or capture, the crews had accomplished their mission. The German bombers that followed knew exactly where to find their targets. The Do-18 continued to serve throughout the early months of World War II, but its limitations became increasingly apparent. In 1940, some squadrons changed their base to Norway. The vulnerable and underpowered flying boat was soon relegated to training and the air-sea rescue role. From frontline reconnaissance to training and rescue work, it was a ignoble slide for an aircraft that had once represented the cutting edge of aviation technology. In Norway, the Do-18s found themselves in an even more dangerous environment. On 8 May 1940, V-2X Seafolk was shot down by 3 Blackburn skewers of 803 Naval Air Squadron, Fleet Air Arm, operating from the Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, the same squadron that had claimed the first victory would strike again, showing how vulnerable these slow-flying boats were to modern fighters. Including the civilian flying boats, 170 Dornier Do-18 were built by Dornier in Mansell, 48, until March 1939, and Weser Flugzeugbau in Einswarden and Nordenham, 122, until August 1940. In total, only 170 of these aircraft were built, a small number compared to the thousands of bombers and fighters that would darken the skies in the years to come. The story of the Do-18 reflects the broader tragedy of the era. Germany's advanced civilian aviation technology, developed during the interwar years supposedly for peaceful purposes, was quickly militarized when war came. The same engineering brilliance that created record-setting mail planes was turned to building weapons of war. For the British, shooting down that first Do-18 was more than just a military victory. It was a psychological boost, proof that they could stand up to the German war machine. The Fleet Air Arm, often overshadowed by the RAF, had struck the first blow. Young naval aviators flying from the decks of carriers would play a crucial role in the war to come, and it all started with 9 skewers diving on a lonely flying boat over the North Sea. The Blackburn skewer itself would soon fade from frontline service, replaced by more capable aircraft. But for one moment on September 26, 1939, it was the hero of the hour. The pilots and gunners of 803 Squadron had made history, even if they didn't fully realize it at the time. What happened to the Do-18 after those early war years? Some soldiered on in secondary roles. It was later modified with 656 kW, 880 HP BMW, 132N radial engines to test a possible upgrade for the Luftwaffe's aircraft. Flying in this form on 21 November 1939 as the Do-18L. It suffered cooling problems, however, and further development of the radial-powered Do-18 was abandoned. Even attempts to improve the design couldn't overcome its fundamental limitations as a combat aircraft. The last Do-18s served out their days far from the front lines, rescuing downed airmen from the sea or training new pilots. It was honorable work, saving lives rather than taking them, perhaps more in keeping with the aircraft's original peaceful purpose. Today, no complete Do-18 survives. These aircraft that once bridged continents and set records have all returned to the elements, crashed, shot down, or scrapped. Only photographs and memories remain of these graceful flying boats that found themselves thrust into a war they were never meant to fight. The human stories connected to that first shoot on stay with us. Lieutenant McEwen and Petty Officer Seymour, the British crew who made history. The 4 German airmen in the Do-18, doing their duty for their country, who became prisoners of war or casualties in those first weeks of conflict. Behind the statistics and milestones were real people, young men who probably joined their respective air services for the adventure and the chance to fly, not knowing they would become part of history. There's something particularly poignant about the Do-18 story. Here was an aircraft designed to bring the world closer together, to carry mail and messages across vast oceans. Instead, it became a casualty of the forces tearing the world apart. The same technology that enabled peaceful record-setting flights was turned to military purposes and ultimately to destruction. The reconnaissance role that the Do-18 filled was unglamorous but essential. These crews flew long, lonely patrols over cold seas, knowing that if they found the enemy, they would likely be outnumbered and outgunned. They weren't hunting for glory. They were the eyes of the fleet, gathering information that might save their comrades or help win battles. The engagement highlighted a critical deficiency in the Royal Navy's almost paranoid doctrine of enforcing radio silence. Although the German seaplanes were visible to lookouts on the warships, their position could not be relayed to the skewer crews with accuracy by all these lamp signals. The skewers had to be alerted to the direction of the German aircraft by flares launched from the warships. This detail reveals how primitive aerial warfare still was in 1939. Ships couldn't effectively communicate with their aircraft, relying on signal lamps and flares. Within a few years, radar and radio technology would revolutionize aerial combat. But in those early days, pilots still relied on their eyes and luck to find the enemy. The weather over the North Sea on that September day was typical grey, cold, with scattered clouds. For the crew of the Do-18, it must have seemed like just another patrol until those 9 skewers appeared out of the clouds. In those final moments, as bullets struck home and engines failed, did they think about their families back in Germany? Did they wonder if their sacrifice would mean anything? For the British pilots, the elation of victory was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. They had won the first round, but years of brutal warfare lay ahead. Some of those who flew that day would not survive the war. Others would go on to greater victories or bitter defeats, but all of them would remember being there at the beginning, when the war was young and anything seemed possible. The Do-18's legacy extends beyond that first shoot-down. The first German aircraft shot down over France during the war was a Dornier Do-17P of 2 F-123, brought down by Pilot Officer Mould's Hawker Hurricane of No. 1 Squadron RAF on 30 October 1939. Note that this was a different Dornier model, the Do-17, a land-based bomber nicknamed the Flying Pencil. The RAF would claim their first victory over France about a month after the Fleet Air Arm's success over the North Sea. This distinction mattered greatly at the time. The rivalry between the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm and the Royal Air Force was real and sometimes bitter. The Fleet Air Arm had been under RAF control until 1937, and naval aviators were keen to prove their worth. Shooting down the first German aircraft of the war was a vindication of sorts, proof that naval aviation had an important role to play. The propaganda value of these early victories cannot be overstated. In September 1939, the British public was anxious and uncertain. The memory of World War I's slaughter was still fresh, and many feared what this new conflict would bring. News of the first German aircraft shot down was splashed across newspapers, giving people hope that perhaps this war would be different, that British technology and courage would prevail. But for the Do-18 crews stationed along Germany's northern coasts, the loss of one of their aircraft was a sobering reminder of their vulnerability. These men had trained for reconnaissance and rescue missions, not aerial combat. Now they knew that any patrol might be their last, that British fighters could appear from nowhere, and that their slow, lightly armed flying boats were easy prey. The Do-18 represented a different era of aviation, when flying boats ruled long-distance routes and land planes were limited by the scarcity of prepared runways. By 1939, this era was already ending. New long-range land-based aircraft were making flying boats obsolete for most roles. The war would accelerate this transition, pushing aviation technology forward at an unprecedented pace. There's irony in the Do-18 story. An aircraft designed to unite distant lands through mail service became an instrument of war. Crews who might have been delivering letters found themselves searching for enemy warships. The same engines that had powered record-setting flights now carried their aircraft on military patrols that might end in death or capture. As the war progressed, both sides would suffer losses that made that first shootdown seem almost quaint. Thousand-bomber raids would devastate cities. Entire squadrons would be wiped out in minutes. The individual heroism and tragedy of those early encounters would be subsumed in the industrial scale of modern warfare. Yet that first victory mattered. It set a precedent, showed that the British were ready to fight, and marked the beginning of a 6-year aerial conflict that would range from the Arctic to the South Pacific. Every air battle that followed could trace its lineage back to that moment when 9 skewers dove on a German flying boat over the North Sea. The WWII crews who survived the war would have seen their world transformed. The Germany they had served ceased to exist, divided and occupied. The British Empire they had fought against would soon dissolve. The aircraft they flew became museum pieces, reminders of a conflict that had reshaped the globe. For modern audiences, it's hard to imagine the courage required for those early wartime flights. No ejection seats, no sophisticated survival equipment, just men in leather flying suits trusting their lives to engines and airframes that were still relatively primitive. Whether British or German, these airmen shared a brotherhood of the air, even as they tried to kill each other. The North Sea, that cold and unforgiving body of water, would claim many more aircraft before the war ended. British and German airmen alike would ditch in its grey waves, some to be rescued, others to disappear forever. The WWII, designed to land on water, at least gave its crews a fighting chance if they had to ditch. Many other aircraft types would simply sink like stones. The first British air kill of World War II, a Dornier WWII seaplane, came from Blackburn skewers launched from Ark Royal in September. This simple statement in a historical record represents so much more. The fear and excitement of those first combat missions, the satisfaction of the British crews who scored the victory, the despair of the German airmen who were shot down, and the beginning of an aerial war that would revolutionize military strategy. As we approach the end of our story, it's worth reflecting on what the WWII represented. It was a bridge between two eras, the romantic age of flying boats and long-distance aviation records, and the harsh reality of modern warfare. Its crews were caught in this transition, peaceful airmen forced to become warriors. The families of those German airmen shot down on September 26, 1939, would have received telegram notifications that their loved ones were missing or captured. In homes across Germany, mothers and wives would have wept for sons and husbands who had left for what seemed like a routine patrol and never returned. On the British side, there would have been quiet pride in the victory, tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Today, when we look back at that first aerial victory, we see it not just as a military milestone, but as a human story. Behind the aircraft designations and squadron numbers were real people, young men who loved to fly, who believed in their countries, who did their duty as they saw it. Some died, some survived to old age, but all were changed by their experiences. The WWII never achieved the fame of other World War II aircraft. It wasn't a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt, a Lancaster or a Flying Fortress. It was a workhorse, a functional design that did its job without glamour. But for a few moments on September 26, 1939, one WWII and its crew found themselves at the center of history. In the end, the story of the WWII and that first shootdown reminds us that war is not just about technology and tactics. It's about human beings caught up in forces beyond their control, doing their best to survive and serve. Whether they flew for Britain or Germany, whether they lived or died, these airmen deserve our remembrance. The WWII that was shot down that September day has long since disappeared, its wreckage scattered by North Sea currents or salvaged for scrap metal. But its place in history remains secure. It was the first, the beginning of a new kind of war, a marker that divided the uneasy peace of early September 1939 from the long years of conflict that would follow. As our story draws to a close, perhaps the most fitting tribute to all those involved in that historic encounter is simply to remember them not as enemies, but as young men who found themselves making history in the skies over a cold, grey sea. They were aviators first, warriors by circumstance, and human beings always. The Dornier WWII, that gentle flying boat designed for peace, thrust into war, and remembered for being the first to fall, embodies the tragedy of its era. In its story, we see reflected the larger tragedy of World War II, the transformation of human achievement into instruments of destruction, the courage of individuals on all sides, and the terrible price of conflict. And so, when we remember that first aerial victory of World War II, let us remember not just the milestone but the men, not just the aircraft but the dreams they once carried, not just the war but the peace that was lost. For in that remembrance lies a lesson for all time, that behind every historical moment are human stories of courage, fear, duty, and sacrifice that transcend the boundaries of nation and time. The Do-18 story ended not with glory but with obsolescence, not with triumph but with quiet service in secondary roles. Yet perhaps there is honor in that too, in the rescue missions flown, in the pilots trained, in the lives saved rather than taken. The aircraft that began its life connecting continents with mail, ended it connecting human beings with hope of rescue from the unforgiving sea. This, then, is the legacy of the Dornier Do-18 and that first shootdown. A reminder that even in war's darkest moments, there remain stories of human dignity and courage that deserve to be told and retold, lest we forget the true cost of conflict and the value of peace.